Hi, welcome or welcome back. My name is Eleanor, and today I thought I'd talk briefly about an amazing poet called Linda Gregg. I've been reading her poems for a while now, but it was only recently that I was moved to go back to her. For some reason, it just worked with the mood I was in and the place I am in life, I suppose. There's no rhyme or reason for why a poet might attract you at a certain time in your life. Now, I've been watching a few other booktubers this week, and one in particular, Yenna, who is known as the modern Ajumma. She mentioned that she's going through what she feels is possibly the beginning of a reading slump, and that a few of her booktube friends might be feeling the same way. And so I thought maybe Linda Gregg might help them as she's helped me. Now, I know that I talk often about poetry that is quote unquote hard, that you have to work towards. I would say that Linda Gregg's poetry is not hard, but it is mysterious in its own particular way. She was born in 1942 and died unfortunately in 2019. She grew up in rural California, Marin County, and she lived on this large plot of land that her family had, and she would be basically running wild with her twin sister Louise. And so if you can imagine, that's the start of her life. And then eventually she decides she's going to study poetry, and she moves to New York. And in New York, she spends the last years of her life in New York. But she travels quite a bit. First of all, teaching, and second of all, with her two partners. Now, the thing that most people talk about when they talk about Linda Gregg is her connection to another poet called Jack Gilbert. He was her professor, I think, right at the beginning when she was just starting to go to poetry classes, and they fell in love. And you might be wondering, why am I talking about this before I'm talking about her poetry? And you'd be right to do that. I mean, is it really fair to be discussing her personal love life? The thing is, if you watch her talks, and there are several recorded interviews and talks and readings that she gives that are now on YouTube and Vimeo, and I'll link the ones that I think are the best and the most interesting. If you watch those, you see that she herself will often discuss her relationship with Jack Gilbert before she even talks about her own poetry. And also, it's almost impossible for her to talk about anything to do with poetry without somehow bringing him up. And there's one interview where they're doing a reading together. Now, what year was it that they were doing that reading? 1976. It's a two-part recording on YouTube. So in 1976, they're doing a reading together, and it's very hard to watch because they're both sitting on a sort of platform, a sort of stage. And she's just really, I feel that she's really fawning over him. At that time, they weren't even together anymore. He was actually married to an artist called Michiko Nogami. And yet they were so clearly a couple. Now, that's really none of my business, none of anybody's business really. But the thing is that it's enmeshed in her poetry. And it's also a fact, I think, that for me at least, a huge part of my attraction to poetry is the attraction to the poets themselves as celebrities. And I don't think that's quite the same as prose writers who are celebrities. In the case of poets, because poetry is much more intimate. The writing of it, the reading of it, the connection when someone is reading their poetry in front of you. And because the community is so small as well, there is a sense that there's a sense of curiosity and a bit of a frisson when it comes to the poets that you love and who they love. So she published her first book of poetry, Too Bright to See, in 1981, and then went on until 2008 when she came out with the book All of It Singing, which is the book I have, that is collected in new works. So how would I go about describing her poems? Let me give you some words from better wordsmiths than me. W.S. Merwin describes her work as a combination of pain, sadness, and a kind of radiance that takes over. And I immediately felt that was correct, even though she writes a lot about the hardships that come with being lonely and also being a partner, with having this relationship or relationships with other people. She also is very, very focused, very strong-willed, and there is a radiance to everything she writes. James Longenbach calls her work visionary, but not obviously so at first, and I agree with that as well. There's a certain luminous texture to the words that she puts together, and it's rather entrancing, and it takes over. So you're able to read one poem after the other with Linda Gregg, at least I am, not feel overwhelmed, not feel that you have to stop every 2 seconds to look something up. And at the same time, you're realizing as you're progressing in your reading, oh, this has depth, this has substance, and it's also changing something in my own emotional state that you might not have even felt before. Another quote from James Longenbach, because I just loved what he wrote, he said that we do not emerge possessed of usable wisdom when we read her poems. We emerge disoriented and dazzled. I mean, there's a longer quote, and it's the back of the book, All of It Singing, but I just wanted to cut it back to that particular bit where he's saying, a lot of poems, and I think a lot of contemporary poets today, especially the younger ones, they always seem to be striving for usable wisdom in their poem. Something, a little nugget of homespun truth that the reader can take back home with them. And, it's sort of the equivalent of self-help in a poetic box. But she's not about that. She doesn't have any answers. She's trying to use words to describe that ineffable feeling that she might be having at a certain point in a certain relationship she's in, with herself or with others. And so it is somewhat disorienting. It is dazzling, as Longenbach says, but it is also luminous and mind and emotion expanding. So you get all the good that comes with the ease of the reading, and yet you're not sacrificing the depth and the idea that she is creating a world that is completely her own. You will not ever mistake a Linda Gregg poem for anybody else's. Now, all of her 7 books are still available via Grey Wolf Publishing. So I only have the latest one, the new and selected poems, that's called All of It Singing. Oh wait, I forgot. There's one more quote I wanted to bring in. Lindy from Magpie Reads, who is a great booktuber and also writes great comments, commented, I think it was in my last video or maybe the previous one. Yeah, I think it was my last one. We were talking, I talked about the trope within the Gothic novel of the couple just immediately falling in love with each other, love at first sight. And Lindy mentioned in her comment that she has no interest in love at first sight. Her interest is in what the writer feels for the world. Does the writer have love for the world? And I would say Linda Gregg has an overwhelming love for her world. And maybe that's what those quotes were really pointing to. And because love for other people can come and go, her love for the world remains intact and strong. And I think that's sort of the spine of her poetry. And so I would highly recommend her for that, if that's what you're looking for. Now, when I first started reading this, the new and selected poems, I felt very drawn to sort of the middle years of her writing. So you have 1981, she publishes her first book, Too Bright to See. And then 2008 is the last. And then right in the middle, you have 1991, 1995, Sacraments of Desire and Chosen by the Lion. And I was most intrigued by Chosen by the Lion because it's so strong, so powerful. So let me start with that, but then let me explain also how, upon coming back to her after about 6 months, I think, I've seen more in her other works that's intriguing me now. So there is, I think every one of her books is amazing, amazing. But the passion of the 1994 Chosen, I mean, even the title, Chosen by the Lion, it already shows you what's to come. And so I thought I'd read a bit of the titular poem, Chosen by the Lion. And it goes like this. I am the one chosen by the lion at sundown and dragged back from the shining water, yanked back to bushes and torn open, blood blazing at the throat and breast of me, taken as meat, devoured as spirit by spirit. The others will return quickly to drink again peacefully, but for me now there is only faith. Only the fact that the tall windows I lived with were left uncovered halfway up. It starts off with this, with pointing to this nature scene, really. And then you realize she's talking about the power of passion, desire, love. And the ending is so unexpected because it rolls on towards a turning. She turns to her lover, her partner, and she even has dialogue in it. So it's a quite complicated story. It takes you on. It's an emotional story. She says in one of her interviews, and I'll link to that one, and I think it's the one on Vimeo. She says that this was the only book of poems that she wrote in one go, meaning that each poem was written in that same chronological order. So the first poem in the book is the first poem she wrote, and then she went on to write the next one and the next. And she had decided that she would take these particular 2 years to write these poems. And once the 2 years were over, that was it. And I think she did minimal editing, although it's hard to believe that because they're so accomplished. She pointed to something that happened in her personal life where she said she was asked to wait 2 years. What for? We don't know. I can imagine, of course. So what's intrinsic about this book of poems is that there is so much love, so much desire, but it has to be held back and for a long period of time. And of course, that is That is exactly the kind of fire that keeps poetry generally going. So I was really, really into that about 6 months ago. But then when I started rereading her earlier work and her later work in the last week, I realized that it's it's spectacularly good. And even her very first book, and I would say especially her very first book, is just so good. And it's very, very surprising. There's a lot of mystery there, and her voice is very, very clear. Her confidence and sense of self and the tone is really the same. And then with her later poems, you can read how, while the sense of love for the world and attraction to the world and to other people and her great self-confidence as a poet and craftsperson continue, she's also slowing down in a way and looking back. For example, this is the titular poem from her later book, In the Middle Distance. This is from 2006. If I go back into memory, it's not because I like it, but because that's where the hard things are. Nothing that gets excited, almost ripe, and the beauty of things in the middle distance, going down the mountain. She lays the lines in a very Linda Gregg way. Isn't that wonderful? Then you go to the beginning. Okay, so this is in her very first book, Bright to See, from 1981. This poem is called The Girl I Call Alma. The girl I call Alma, who is so white, is good, isn't she? Even though she does not speak, you can tell by her distress that she's just like the beach and the sea, isn't she? And she's disappearing, isn't that good? And the white curtains and the secret smile are just her way with the lies, aren't they? And that we're not alone, ever. And that everything is backwards otherwise. And that inside the no is the yes, isn't it? Isn't it? And that she is the God who perishes, the food we eat, the body we fuck, the loose net we throw out that gathers her. Fish, fish, white sun, tell me we are one, and that it's the others who scar me, not you. So when I first read this, and I was in this book club, I was, we talked about the poems, and then I got a bit of courage up, and I said, so what do you all make of Alma? Because who the hell is she? And everyone just went, oh my gosh, yes, I know, who is she? And I have to say, it really annoyed me at first that there's no answer. So it's just a girl she calls Alma, who is somehow standing in for whatever are her emotions at this time. Now, 6 months ago, this really bothered me, and now, for some reason, I absolutely love it. So, it shows you how you can switch around. Well, if you've got a good poet and you've got their book with you, it's a great investment. Of course, the trick is to decide who's the good poet and which book of theirs to buy. In her case, I was, helped because all of it's singing new and selected poems. It gives you a little tidbit from each book. It's wonderful. But gosh, I wish I knew about her when I was younger, although I didn't really know anything about poetry then. I wish I'd loved poetry in my younger years and known about her so that I could read one of her books and then look forward to the next one coming out. So that is Linda Gregg. I will leave links because a lot of her poems are online. Again, you don't have to go and immediately buy her book. Read her online and let me know what you thought. And don't forget, the only real property is the property of the mind. Bye.